Welcome to Cover Story, a podcast interviewing the artists and designers behind iconic album covers. Our first guest is Jonathan Zawada, a multidisciplinary Australian artist currently based in LA. He has created artwork for albums by Baauer, Rustie, Classixx, Mark Pritchard, and many others, but today's episode gets the story behind his stunning work for Flume's 2016 release, Skin.
I first heard from Flume and his management pretty early on in the development of the album from his perspective. They didn't have a whole lot of music, but they were keen to just get the relationship rolling. And at that point, I had maybe taken a 4-year break from doing album artwork. I spent a long time doing it, maybe 10 years or so, designing album covers during my 20s, and at one point was even a creative director at a record label for a period as well, and have worked on a whole bunch of different albums for different people in different capacities as well, in really creative involvement from bands, Australian bands like the Presets, who I continue to work with and have worked with for a long time, but also sort of more straight up art direction and layout jobs for things like the first Wolf Mother album that I laid out, and a bunch of other more straight up album layout jobs. And I guess after, doing that for 10 years or so, I think I'd sort of, there were parts of the music industry I didn't really like anymore, and not in any way in the way I was treated. I was always treated really well, but there was just sort of a way that the music business functioned that I wasn't into, and it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth in terms of the way the musicians interacted with their labels and the labels interacted with them, and then in a bigger way, the way I kind of feel like to some extent that industry also preys on kids who, that's the market is a bunch of kids who maybe don't have the skills to not get preyed upon in a way. I mean, it's a fairly benign form of preying upon a market, but I guess I just felt bad about the way it was going and not comfortable with working on any music for a little while. So I took a good 2 or 3 years off from designing anything for any bands, and kind of just getting back to making art for myself and focusing on that. But yeah, when Flume's management sort of reached out, I was a bit trepidatious and kind of reluctant to get involved. So they did a little bit of they were lovely people, and basically and managed to convince me to get onto a phone call and also just come out and meet up with Harley and chat to him and all that sort of stuff. So after doing that, I think after the first meeting with them, I got along super well with Harley, and he's such a easy guy to get along with. And what he was doing, he was sort of playing me very early proto versions of songs, and that sounded really interesting to me musically as well. So and it was also nice, I think, to feel involved in an earlier stage, which was probably creatively one of the problems I had with where working on music artwork had gotten me in the past. It was sort of like a production line mentality where the album would be done and the campaign would be worked out by the label, and they'd all have a mood board figured out of what they wanted to do. And it wasn't a particularly gratifying creative experience, where this one felt like it was at a very early stage in the development of the project, that and they were keen for me to be involved as early as I wanted to, and sort of so that we could develop the artwork at the same pace that the album itself was being developed. I think he was pretty familiar with my work already. He said he'd actually seen lots of it through his previous album, where he'd sort of be presented with directions for various things to do with the design for that and his previous live show. He saw a lot of my work on mood boards for that, and so I think he ended up realizing, and his management ended up realizing, that the work he consistently liked from those mood boards was my work anyway, which is why they decided to reach out to me. So I think that then he was pretty happy, at least in his mind. Initially, he was happy with the idea of just giving it over to me and letting me develop some stuff. So he didn't come with anything, which was great for me. I kind of prefer that for my own, creative process. But also, I think it was early enough in the album that if he had a concrete vision for what the aesthetic would be, but hadn't actually finished the music itself, that would have been worrying, because I think that could probably diverge by the time he finished the album. So initially it was just more of an exploration phase where I was kind of developing concepts and presenting my own mood boards of stuff that I was sort of felt like they could be the right thing. None of it was necessarily anything I thought would be covers, and none of it was even really design. I was sort of developing just a conceptual framework about the narrative that I felt could flow through the artwork. And he responded to that and thought that all sounded great. And in the end, actually, the album cover came out of one of those mood boards, as it was a work that I had just privately done for myself, sort of like a little artwork, a little mini series of artworks that I'd been developing, that I dropped one of those images into one of these sort of conceptual mood boards, and he really picked up on that and liked that one image. So we kind of then just delved into that and elaborated upon that, and explored it further in the context of it being an album cover. One of the very first reasons I wanted to get into doing design for music was that I kind of recognized how much the artwork influenced my reading of the album. And then working with musicians and hearing a lot of music for a long time before it has any artwork component, I used to find it quite terrifying having to dictate what that aesthetic was, but I've since become more comfortable with it. And it's funny to realize how enmeshed the two things can become a lot of the time, the visual and the music itself. And then, I think it was just a lucky chance kind of thing, because the more Harley and I talked about various things, not just the artwork and not just the job, but just, chatting as two people about stuff in the world and stuff we're interested in, there was a lot of aspects that were embedded in that album image that we both kind of realized were things that we were both, and he particularly, was interested in independently, and had a different thing going on. For example, his mum is a horticulturalist, and so he's had this long-standing interest in botanical drawings and things like that anyway. I started working on digital plant renderings a long time ago. I've had a couple of exhibitions of things that were much more hard digital versions of plants, and I kept sort of working at them more and more, and I had this idea that I could just do some flowers. And when I sat down and started rendering flowers, I realized how subtle and complex the way light plays through petals and that sort of stuff. And and it's funny, when it works, it totally is hard to figure out how it's digital, because it is so non-digital. But when it doesn't work, it's incredibly obvious. Everybody has like a mental image of what a flower is or what a petal is, and when you even when you glance at one and then you look to recreate one, there's a lot of stuff you leave out. I discovered in doing this, there was just so much stuff that I was leaving out. So it's funny that you say the mathematical thing. I think that's actually a big component of why they work, and what I think some people have seemed to have responded to as well is a lot of the texture, or all of the texturing, and a lot of the way the modeling is done is part procedural. All the texturing and all the coloring is all procedural, and so there's all a bunch of little mathematical nodes underpinning the way it's all generated. So it's not an impressionistic vision of it, which for me, I do it because it feels closer to the way nature works and feels more honest for what I'm creating. But I think it ends up creating something that then doesn't suffer from being somebody's impression of a flower. And as a result, it kind of then appears to be much more realistic as well. Which is kind of funny, because I guess there's, in chatting to Harley and I've sort of sat down and worked alongside him as he's worked on music on various times as he's been touring, and he's hung out in the studio, and realized that there's a lot of what he does that's very, very similar to that, obviously with a totally different outcome. After the album sort of was rolling along and we felt like that was developing comfortably, the artwork side of things for that, his management were then keen for me to get involved in his live show, basically figuring out ways to, I guess it's creative direction, I suppose, working with the staging designer and the lighting designers and stuff to develop ideas for the stage show. So that included physical structures and his desk that he plays at, and then that rolled into live visuals and things like that, which I was not at all comfortable with and had never done before. So they had to do a lot of convincing to get me on board with that idea. But with each little subsequent step, I guess we had, another little thing to chat about, and especially in the context of the live show, which has a whole lot of parts to it. I think I kind of went back to the conceptual framework I'd developed for the physical release artwork, and then had to dig deeper into that. And as we dug into that, and Harley and I talked about that stuff, the rhythm became more natural, I suppose. And then those sorts of things, I guess, because the live show is so evolving in a way, and it's not as, when you make a record, there's a point where the cover is the cover and that's it. It can't be changed, and it's not going to be changed. And, it's kind of got a full stop after it. Whereas the live show stuff, sort of, he shuffles it around in his sets, or, there's lots of capacity to keep editing and keep changing things and see what works and see what doesn't. So it becomes a more organic process, which meant that we could kind of go back and forth on things a lot, which was really, really nice. I mean, it wasn't a painful back and forth. It was just a kind of like an exciting creative back and forth. So, stuff like, I guess, things like a really good example of that is I developed a concept for his live show visuals for Smoke and Retribution, which were just these single images of these weapons rendered kind of fantastically and in unreal textures and materials and colors and things like that. And they just kind of came up with the beat of the track, or with the structure of the track, just slide after slide after slide. And he loved that when we were rehearsing and putting that up. Harley was super into that. And then he sort of was, we were chatting about it, and I was saying I'd love to animate some for something. And he was like, "Oh, that'd be great. I'll make some music for that. And so he went off and just made these little mini songs and sent them back to me. And then I animated the existing stuff to that. And then he kind of responded again to those and made some more music components to that. And it became a much less linear kind of start and stop process. And we were able to just like bounce ideas around and feedback off one another. And I guess as the year rolled on, and as we had more and more bits of content that got created and things that were generated, either things that was, we kind of knew we had to make, like single covers and EP covers and things like that, to things that we just felt like we wanted to make, which was a lot of the live visual ideas. And even at the moment, there's an exhibition up in Australia, which was here in Los Angeles last year as well, of a whole lot of stuff that Harley and I just felt like we wanted to create out of the narrative that we'd developed around the album together. By the end of the year, I think we'd sort of had not heaps of time together, but had these like great moments, or, a couple of days here or a few days there, just working creatively alongside one another without management and without record labels and without all that sort of stuff hanging over our heads. And now we're in a good mental place where the two of us, I think, I don't feel worried ever that he's going to shut anything down, because I don't feel like anything I come up with thinking about him feels like it's probably going to be on the right tangent now, because we're both in the same headspace. This is now my ideal scenario, and is totally how I would seek out, or, if asked to do art for music, I think this is the type of scenario I'd look for. I think a lot of this is probably testament to his record label, and there's maybe a couple of other labels I know that are capable of knowing when to step back and knowing when they need to be involved, and that's a real skill. So, and it's tricky. I totally understand from their perspective how hard that can be as well. They've got a lot of stuff that they have to juggle, and a lot of very tangible things that they need to make sure that they nail down. So it can't just be all a big, like, I don't know, creative art room fun time scenario. But they've been great, and Harley's been great. And he's like, I think he's just a really passionate worker as well. So he's able to do what he does while he's touring and all the rest of it, which is incredibly difficult. I'm trying to eschew the, for 10 years, I guess, or for the longest time when I was doing art for music, I had a subtly different concept of what designing for music was, and it was a bit more of a traditional design approach. And I've sort of had my mind shifted on that recently, in that I'd like it to feel like the album covers that I'm doing are just as much a part of my personal art practice as the exhibitions that I put on that are wholly my own, and that's a far more challenging thing to achieve. But I think there feels like there's more opportunities to do that these days as well.
Jonathan's work went on to win the 2016 ARIA Award for Best Cover Art. Flume also took home his first Grammy for the album in the Best Dance Electronic category. Jonathan was gracious enough to answer a few more questions about his life, career, and methods.
Do you remember the very first piece of album art you made and how that scenario came to play?
Yeah, I didn't even finish my first year of my design degree at university in Australia. I sort of dropped out and got a job. But during the first few months there, I met some guys who were in older years than me, who actually, in a really crazy roundabout way, one of them is now signed to Harley's record label, I think. But they had a funny little experimental electronic act, and I think the first thing I did was a little flyer, like postcard-sized flyer promoting a night that they were doing. Or a series of nights that they were doing. And I was super excited about that opportunity. I was so into it. So, yeah, that was the very first music thing that I did. And I don't think anything immediately happened after that. But then, as the years rolled on, I sort of random different, more and more music stuff kept coming to me after that. But that felt so exciting. I felt like I loved Designers Republic, and I loved Warp just so deeply at that time. It had informed so much of my teenage years. So I was very much reflecting that in the work that I was doing there. I thought it was my big opportunity to basically be doing a Björk album cover or something.
I know you work in multiple mediums with the furniture and painting and just totally other different styles of digital art. So when you're working on a project like this, do you have a specific medium that you find yourself drawn to a bit in your off time? That you feel like is a little neglected, or something that is kind of bubbling up inside you that you want to work on?
I find I bounce from one to the other. So actually at the moment, for the last few days, I've been soldering, wiring, and assembling capacitive touch switches in lamps, and dealing with people that do electroplating and things like that.
Totally
so
different.
Yeah, totally different practical hand-on stuff. And that's me craving to do that after months of sitting in 3D and rendering animated stuff and doing that sort of thing. So I kind of overdose on one thing and then swing back to something else entirely, whether that's oil painting or pencil drawings or something like that. So there's not really, I don't think there's anything I really feel innately the most comfortable with, although I think 3D, just generally, the 3D environment feels fairly intuitive, and the feedback loop is super quick. So even if I'm working with a physical design thing like tables, or I've been working on a seating thing and things like that, that's obviously all has a 3D component. But so I'll super quickly sit down, and where I used to even probably sketch that in a sketchbook, now I don't even bother. I just go straight to modeling it really quickly, because that just feels the most intuitive at the moment. But yeah, I then hate that and want to get away from the computer for a few days or a week or two.
And kind of on that regard, with a little bit of the mix of the two, I've heard, or you'll begin the piece 3D digitally and then take it from that to an oil painting. Did that kind of spawn from that same thought of kind of wanting to get away from the computer for a bit? Still being able to work on the same piece, but kind of getting that more organic freedom.
Yeah. I think it came from that, and it came from not even thinking. I think, especially early on when I was doing my personal art projects, the idea of something sitting down and something being a purely digital thing felt too close to what my day job was, which was being a graphic designer, where everything was digital, and the point where it became real was just a mechanical process out of my control. So I felt like if I was doing an art thing, I would prefer it to. It didn't feel like it was done if it was just a digital thing. It had to sort of make its way out into the world, and I never found it particularly satisfying to just print something. So I sort of felt compelled in that respect, and in kind of a more deeper artistic sense as well, in terms of the value of the work process. I felt like I was sort of just, if I was just going to print something out or fabricate something, that would be just skipping a step that probably required a bit more deeper thought. So yeah, and I've loved always that interplay between analog and digital, and the fact that it's never appeared to me, it never felt like it was a separate part of the process. It felt just as much of a piece of the medium as, if you say you're doing a painting and you sketch it out first in pencil on the canvas and then you paint over the top of it in the same way, sort of rendering something up in 3D and then painting from that image just felt like it was just another tool in the kit. It wasn't so much they didn't fall. It wasn't like a bipolar split between the two things. They were just both tools to be used.
So did you begin getting into art digitally or physically?
I got into art, I guess, physically. When I was a little kid, I used to draw a lot, and I used to make stuff a lot in my dad's shed, like with whatever bits of wood and stuff that I could find. So I compulsively drew, and I drew with oil pastels and all this sorts of stuff. And then in my younger teenage years, we didn't have a whole lot of money, so I used to make a whole lot of stuff for myself, and I desperately wished I could have had a Super Nintendo and things like that. So I used to make myself board games that all felt very designy in a weird way, but were then, made with oil pastels or weird things like that. Like, I'd filled my room with oil pastel drawings and pencil drawings of Magic Johnson because I couldn't afford it.
Do you have any exhibitions lined up currently, or any personal projects like that you're excited about for the 2017?
Yeah, I think it's going to be hopefully in January of 2017. We'll be doing a little, I guess it's like an exhibition, a little release of sort of, I suppose, for want of a better word, they're furniture objects. They're sort of functional art objects or things in the space. So we're sort of finally bringing that together. That's taken a good year of that. The process for that sort of thing, it takes a really long time. So that's all finally wrapping up. I'm super excited about that because it's just such a different thing from, Flume territory and album art and stuff. It's those things have to work in a very, very, very different way. So hopefully that'll all come together soon.
Sure. How long have you been working on these pieces?
I guess there's some of the tables in it, in the show, and maybe 4 years ago I initially designed them. And then there's other stuff in here that is sort of, there's some vase objects and a sort of a seat, I guess. Or yeah, it's a seat, but it doesn't look anything like a seat. That were from early or middle of this year, and just came about, in little gaps between having deadlines for jobs and things, being able to doing exactly what I was saying before, getting tired of being in front of the computer. So bouncing off of that and doing some figuring out some weird paint process or coding.
Great. And do you have any specific things you like to do when you complete a project, or just times during a project when you just need a little time off from working on your art?
I have a 4-year-old son who has intellectual and some physical disabilities, so I don't get any spare time at all. All my time is actually, I was joking about this. I just went to Australia for some things with Flume, and it was just crazy to me how much I'd gotten used to the idea of kind of finishing things to a 75 or 80% finish rate and then having to move on to something else really quickly. And when I was in Australia working on this stuff, I had time to completely finish tasks, and I really didn't know what to do with myself at all. So no, everything just overlaps. I constantly feel like I'm behind all the time. I'm always finishing one thing and doing another. At the moment I have one computer rendering a poster for Warp whilst I've been working on lamps on the other side of the room and designing a logo for someone on another computer. So nothing ever feels finished.
A nice relaxing Friday night.
Yeah, he has completely changed the way I've approached everything, and I think that's actually probably one of the reasons why I returned to doing artwork for music as well, is just sort of realizing that there's something in the world about working with people in a positive, creative way that's just gratifying and ultimately good in a very simple way, where I think my world was maybe more overcomplicated before I found out about his condition, and it's all everything's streamlined for me now in a way. I don't think so. I don't want to say I don't think so deeply, but I don't have as much. I don't place any value at all on cool, for one thing. So I think I've been liberated in a way.
Yeah, that's a great perspective on
it. Yeah. It's been a huge revelation. I mean, it's not at all easy, but it's.
Yeah, I'm sure it's totally flipped things around upside down and.
Yeah, totally, completely. It's super incongruous, going to like funny. I mean, seeing Harley and seeing his world and then in general, like parties with kids and record label stuff is it just doesn't gel with with the rest.
Polar opposite.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the first episode of Cover Story, and thank you to Jonathan for joining us. You can find more of his work on Instagram at ZAWHATTHE and on the web at zawada.com.au or zawada.io. These links and other show notes can be found at coverstorypodcast.com. We have some more talented guests coming up, so make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Till next time.